Okay, so it's 6:30. Can somebody give me a thumbs up that you're hearing me? Um, or say something in the chat just so that we're all clear. Fantastic. Um, okay, so we're starting promptly. I'm sure some people will still come in the next couple of minutes. But I would like to welcome everyone to the What It Takes to Get into Broadcast Media. This is the 8th talk in this year's What It Takes Alumni Speaker Series for 2022-23. And this session specifically is delivered in collaboration with the University of Westminster's alumni team and the Westminster Enterprise Network. I'm Jofia Kunvari. I am the Enterprise Education Officer within the Westminster Enterprise Network team. Us as a team bring together students and recent graduates with industry to develop their entrepreneurial skills, engage in self-employment work and create businesses. And I personally am working to support initiatives across the university to embed entrepreneurial learning opportunities right into the classroom. Before I introduce our speaker, there's a couple of housekeeping that I want to get through for everybody. So this talk is being recorded. It will be edited and made available on YouTube when it's ready. We will send you the link, so you will get it in due course. Your cameras and microphones are automatically turned off. This is so that everything runs as smoothly as possible. But the live chat is on. So in the group chat, you are able to ask questions to our speaker. We will collate your questions throughout the session and I'll put these to Kate at the end. Or if for some reason you would rather privately message a moderator, you can do that and they will also add your question to the Q&A part at the end. And even though live chat is on, the live recording, which ends up on YouTube, won't pick up any of your usernames or the chat. So no need to worry about that. And you can also change your notification settings to stop the sound and pop-up notifications. You can just click on the purple cog button in the bottom right and go to settings. And now to what this session is all about. I'm delighted to introduce our alumni speaker for today's talk, Kait Borsay, who will be sharing her insights into media broadcasting career path today. Since completing her multimedia journalism MA at Westminster in 2016, Kay has become a successful news and sports presenter and currently hosts her own current affairs show on Times Radio Monday to Thursday evenings. During this talk, Kate will take you through her career journey and what she has learned along the way and who has inspired her. I'll now pass over to Kate, then I'll come back online and ask your questions to her. Please put any questions you have in the virtual chat box as we go along. Over to Kate.
Sophia, thank you so much. And I've got a presentation as well, just to kind of remind myself of a few key points to run through with you all. So we'll get that up in just a moment. And a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for spending a bit of your Friday nights with me this evening. I'm not going to talk for too long. Instead, I'm really interested to know what your questions are. And I know you come from all different levels of experience. Perhaps broadcast media is something that you've had your eye on, but it's not kind of part of your formal education at the moment. Or maybe you are studying it or something closely connected to it, and you want some advice on being out in the industry, or maybe you're working partly in the industry already. So there'll be time for plenty of questions and answers at the end of the session, and I'm really keen for you to get those in as well. Don't let me bang on for too long. It's what I do every night, every day. I have to listen to the sound of my own voice. So yeah, I would love to get your questions in. Let's just bring up the PowerPoint then, and this just kind of allows me a few prompts. I'll try and bring this up so we can see it up on the screen. Hopefully you can still see me as well. So we'll just go on to this. In fact, I think I can move this myself. I don't normally present with a PowerPoint presentation. Normally it's just into a radio microphone. So I'm Kait Borsay. Hello. My background really is all different types of broadcast. I actually started out as an actress. I really liked the idea of performing, of characters. I loved plays and playwriting and English literature. And I actually originally wanted to be an actress. And I went to drama school when I was about 18, and I did a showcase, which is where you perform in front of kind of industry professionals. And one of them came up to me at the end and said, that was great. Have you ever thought about presenting? And I thought to myself, well, that's charming, isn't it? Obviously, my acting skills are so immense that they aren't interested in me for my acting skills. Instead, they just think I can talk a lot, which is actually probably a fair assessment. And that kind of planted a seed. My journey from there, really, I mean, I've had a ton of different jobs, and I think this makes me quite useful as a presenter. So for anyone out there who is doing something a bit different now, or who has, come to study a bit later, I think that's really beneficial, as well as going directly into it. So I've done loads of different jobs, from running restaurants to working in retail, in footwear, designing shoes and handbags, traveling the world for a retailer. I've done loads of different stuff, and I think that's kind of really benefited me. The presenting came along in the end quite by chance. The explosion of satellite TV meant that there were loads of channels looking for presenters, and that's how I cut my teeth, just doing live TV, very basic. It was when people were able to start texting in TV shows, and you guys are probably all too young to remember this, but you could, by the wonders of technology, send a text message from your phone and it would go into a TV show. And that's kind of how I started, which was right on the coalface, completely live, unscripted. We barely had a show plan. We would troop off, and there'd either be a game show element, or there would be some other texting or interactive element, and that's how I began. The kind of serious stuff started with TalkSport. So TalkSport, way back in the day, had a TV station, and I was the first kind of female presenter on the station of that TV show. And then I also started working at TalkSport on the station. And I realized that there was a way that I could combine my love of football — I'd always really enjoyed football — and my love of sport into broadcasting. And that was really kind of how I first started sort of looking at broadcasting. I'd never considered it in any of my study. I left school quite early at 16. As I said, I then went into work and went to drama school. Actually went to drama school twice in the end. I mean, I just should have taken the hint, shouldn't I? After the first time. But I went into it not in a traditional way, basically, and started working at TalkSport, and that then led on to Sky Sports and to Sky News. And whilst I was at Sky Sports, I started with couple of really good friends of mine, something called the Offside Rule, which was 10 years ago now. We started podcasting, which was still very new a decade ago. And it was three women fronting a football show, and that was something very new and unique. And we developed a really good following, which we still have to this day. The Offside Rule started out as a huge pet project. I'll just adjust my headphones. Started out as a pet project, and it eventually got picked up by The Athletic, and then by the New York Times. We've just left the New York Times, actually, so we're at that stage where we're kind of a little bit back to square one. We're trying to find sponsorship. We've had some offers, some production partner offers. So we've, as happens within the industry with the Offside Rule, we know we've got a great product, we've got lots of interest. Our main job now is to make sure that series and that show is commissioned for next season. I kind of went on to work for TV mainly after I was at TalkSport, and the radio didn't come up again until I started working with Eamon Holmes on Talk Radio. And then Times Radio came up, and that was really my kind of big break into radio, I suppose, having done a lot of sport on TV. During my time doing sport on TV, I then did a multimedia journalism masters at Westminster, and that was a great I'd say it was kind of a little career break. I was pregnant with my second child, and a couple of the TV projects that I was working on had come to a natural end, and I was looking really to kind of bed in my journalism skills. I'd had a little bee in my bonnet about maybe not being as up to scratch as I should be with things like, legal issues, to make sure that I was legally watertight. And there were a few processes that I'd always presented shows, but I'd never maybe never done the kind of full journalism training, which obviously I was doing on the job, but I did a master's, which was brilliant actually, because it did fill in a few gaps for me, and it also gave me the confidence to start really thinking about different stories, pitching stories, and how I work more traditionally, I suppose, as a journalist. So I'm at Times Radio now, which is great, and I have a 2-hour show every evening, Monday to Thursday, 8 till 10. Check it out, and that is a real mix of politics and politics, news, current affairs, some entertainment. It's a really nice, lively show, and I'm really, like, I feel really lucky to be doing that. I'm going to sort of start giving you a kind of a little bit of advice, I suppose, stuff that I've picked up along the way. But do by all means get the questions in, because there'll be probably specific things that you want to pick up on. If you're at the stage where you're not directly studying or working in broadcast media or anything close, you want to have a look at work experience, whether it's right for you. And I think nowadays, I'm not sure what the experiences are of you guys, but I think work experience is quite difficult to kind of come across. It feels to me more difficult. So I think one of the main things is trying to work out whether this is for you before you embark upon it. And work experience traditionally used to be one of those things. There are different ways of trying to obtain work experience. A lot of it depends on maybe privately messaging people or working your contacts, and we'll move on to that a little bit later on. So most importantly, you guys need to understand and try and work out whether it's for you or not. There's different types of journalism. Obviously, broadcast media is traditionally TV, radio, podcasting, but actually nowadays you are asked to be all-encompassing. So I got a lot of benefit out of the writing and the kind of straight written journalism that I had to do as part of my master's. So just be aware that even if you're a broadcast journalist, you probably will be asked to write some stuff, and you may be writing your own scripts as well. There's also the production side of it as well. Broadcast media isn't just about being in front of the camera or the microphone. It's also about what happens behind the scenes, and that can be a really good entry point. I know loads of presenters, particularly at Sky Sports and Sky News actually, who've started off as producers, and they've started off as fairly young producers, and they've developed their contacts, and they've started to then pick up assignments, small reporting assignments, and it's gone on from there. If you find that you're not having any luck in the kind of bigger traditional broadcasters, and I think this is something you should all think about doing anyway, start your own podcast. I know everyone's got a podcast, and I'm not ashamed of saying that you're going to start it to kind of receive worldwide acclaim, or to make money, or to develop your own brand. But I think it's just really good practice. It's really good practice to start thinking about how you deliver your words. If you're interested in being in front of the microphone, or it's about how you produce that podcast, how do you format it if you're interested in audio production, for example. And there's written blogs, websites too, and you can upload videos and things on that as well, as you well know. TikTok channels, YouTube, they're all really easy ways now, and they weren't necessarily around when I was interested in becoming a presenter. I didn't really sort of have access to many of those things. So now you've got loads of opportunity to get your bits out there, and I think that's what's really important more than anything else, is that if you want to work in this industry, just start making stuff now. Don't sit and wait for someone to teach you or wait for someone to ask you. Start thinking about what you're passionate in and start making stuff, however it looks, whether it's a YouTube video, whether it's short TikTok videos. I think there's a massive news space in TikTok which isn't really being fulfilled at the moment. I think there's a terrific opportunity, and I'm saying this not being on TikTok myself, but there's a big opportunity on TikTok. I think there are increasingly high numbers of people, particularly the younger generation, getting their news from TikTok. That's how that is how they receive their news. They don't watch news bulletins, they don't read news websites particularly. They'll be getting it off short videos on TikTok. So there's a big opportunity, I think, there for broadcasters. And I know people who've developed a presence on TikTok and have been hired by the BBC, for example, as a result of that. And be prepared to work your way up. Very, very few people are going to leave university or walk out of their first job and be offered a seat presenting Sky News or any other broadcast media format. And the same goes for production as well. Just be patient, but you're going to have to work hard. This is just a bit of kit advice, I think, for those of you who are thinking about starting your own thing, there are a couple of pieces of kit that I return to again and again, as a broadcast journalist and as a multimedia journalist. And it's things like, I mean, obviously your mobile phone, that goes without saying, but utilizing things like the mini tripods that you can get on Amazon or elsewhere, selfie sticks as well. All of this stuff helps to make your product look good if you're presenting or you're producing someone else. Maybe you're working with a classmate or you're working with a colleague, and you decided to make something together to get a project off the ground. And there are loads of different things like USB wireless microphones as well, which I find really useful. They just plug via a wire into my phone, and it means that you can have better audio quality through your phone. So I think audio quality, certainly if you're doing a video on your phone, can be a bit patchy, and you can use USB wireless mics to kind of make it sound more professional. Recording devices, there are loads of different recording devices out there that you can take with you or handheld. Again, for audio, your phone is pretty good now. You can get attachments to put just directly on the end of your phone. You can also film via a DSLR as well. I used to do that quite a bit in my day when I was studying. I don't even think you need to do so much of that these days, really, if you're just starting out. It depends how you like to work. There's a bit of wisdom here, but as I say, chuck your questions in and we'll expand on this. I think one of the main sort of bits of advice really is to just find your people. In any job, in any workplace, in any industry, it can be really intimidating when you first walk into it. You leave this sort of lovely, cozy, comfortable classroom setting, and you go out into the big wide world and suddenly it looks very scary. Just I think it's really important to kind of find your tribe, find some colleagues, find some co-conspirators, try and develop friendships, even if they're not in the workplace, even if they're from uni or from college. Find people who are like you, who you get along with, and keep that going. Find those people who can understand you and what you want to do. Use those people as your inspiration. If your friend Jimmy is starting a new project, that might lead you to think, well, maybe I should get going with my project now. It's all good and healthy. Authenticity, I think, is really important, and trying to be a little bit different. There's no point trying to sound like your favorite TV presenter or your favorite radio presenter. This is if you're front of camera, front of mic. You've got to find a way to be authentic. You've got to try and find your own style. And that doesn't always come straight away, and that's totally fine. Some people have it. Some people go to uni, they have a very authentic style, a very original style, and that propels them and gives them opportunities. Other people develop their own style and their integrity and their authenticity as they go through. But just, think about being you, making sure that you are always you. If you try and be someone else, if I tried to be someone else on the radio, I'd quickly get found out. I have 2 hours of live radio every night. It would be impossible for me to keep up the facade of being someone else over those 2 hours. And I think people tell, because you don't give away the full you if you try to be someone that you're not. Practice, no one's looking, bedroom mirror on your phone. I mean, you guys are really lucky that you've got phones that you can video yourself. You can, if you're producing, you can piece things together. So you've got all the tools that you need, and just practice. Film yourself, watch it back, even though I find that hideously embarrassing. Just do it. Connecting with the audience as well. Think about who you're talking to when you're talking to someone, whether you're in a radio studio or in a TV studio. Who are you talking to? Try and imagine that, and be open and honest. And that goes back to being authentic, doesn't it, really? There's no point pretending that you know everything to do with economic theory on budget day if you don't. Otherwise, you will quickly come a cropper. It's best to be honest, and probably a lot of your audience doesn't know along with you as well. There's a quick checklist here. It's just stuff that I found useful along the way. Your contacts are your currency. Whether you're a producer or a presenter, whatever you do in broadcast media, your contacts back them up on your phone or laptop. Keep expanding your address book. You will need, so many times in my career, I've gone back to people who I sourced during my uni masters. You know, someone on food banks, someone who spoke to me about London Underground. You know, once you have that contact, hang on to it, and build your contacts book, because you are the most useful person in the newsroom. If there's a story and you can stick your hand up and say, I've got the perfect person for that, that just makes you head and shoulders above everyone else. Create as well, that goes back to doing your own things. Think about how you make your ideas come to life. Never be ashamed of putting ideas forward. They say, don't they, that ideas are currency as well as contacts. But yeah, create. Always think about being creative. What can you do that's a bit different? What can you suggest? Collaboration. I find collaboration really important. So I work with Lindsay mainly on the offside. Lindsay and I set up the podcast, and then Hayley McQueen joined us. And Lindsay and I still work together today, to the point that we have a production company together. So we now, as well as my work at Times Radio, we also work on corporate projects. We produce podcasts for other people, and we get other projects off the ground as well, which is really important to me. As I sort of stepped out of sport and stepped more into news and current affairs, I started to develop an interest in making programs that weren't necessarily about sport. I did a documentary on loneliness. I've done several different things, and I really appreciate working with Lindsay. I think women particularly work really well together, because it's hard. It's hard to motivate yourself if you're on your own. Equally, it can be difficult if there are too many of you as well. So think about the people who you're collaborating with, and don't necessarily pick the same person as you. So Lindsay and I work together because she's really good at ideas, and some of them are really wacky, and a lot of the time I just have to tell her to sort of step back a bit. But I'm really good at organization and implementing things. Lindsay's really good with approaching random people and asking for cash, or saying, I've got this idea, you need to listen to me. And I'm really good at getting the detail out on an email to them, following up, having a meeting, and trying to get deals across the line. So think about who you're working with. You don't necessarily want an identikit of you. You know, you don't want someone who's exactly like you. You want someone to fill in the gaps of, you know, make sure that you've all got strengths. And confidence, that's, you know, a really important point. It can be really tough in broadcast media. You know, there are some people who, as a journalist, want the biggest story, and they're hungry for that story, and they'll tread over you if they want that story. There are other people who want to be famous, and you know, think it's all about that. And so therefore you are going to come across stumbling blocks. You're gonna, for sort of some of you just starting out, it will feel intimidating, the thought of, you know, standing up in front of a camera, or, you know, making a package as a producer, walking into a newsroom full of journalists who've been there for years, and that's completely natural. But you must, you know, always try and hang on to some confidence, even if you have to fake it a bit, as long as you're not BSing, as long as you're not making it up and saying that you can do things you can't. Sometimes you do just have to brace yourself, walk forward, and say, yes, I can do this. Because, you know, I think the industry can sometimes be, it's mostly very lovely, and workplaces do differ, but you do need to be tough. You do need to be tough. And if you want to progress, you need to be tough. And I'd say tough but charming. And you need to work hard, because it is extremely hard work. There are 12-hour days. And so therefore we've got questions. I've got kind of notes here. So if we go through some questions and there are some common themes, we can maybe, in fact, I can't write on the slide anyway, can I? So ignore that. We'll just go straight to questions. And if you've got, I mean, I'd love to know what your biggest fear is. If you're thinking about being in this industry, what's your biggest fear? If you don't want to put that in the group chat, just message it privately to a moderator. Let's try and, you know, be brave and get those questions out there. There's nothing too silly. You might want to ask something about a very early stage of my career, or you might want to say, what if, or I'm in this situation, can you give me some advice? So that's kind of the main point of this for me. You know a bit about me now. You've listened to a few of my tips, but now really it's kind of how I can help you guys. So have a think about what I can help you with my years of experience now. Even if even if it's something very, very simple, or you think it's a very random question that I've got, get it in. That's absolutely fine. Okay, shall we take some questions?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I think there was so much of these excellent insights into what it takes to get into broadcast media, and I'm really sure the audience found it useful. The questions are slowly coming in and it's going to snowball. We are collecting the questions, so I'm going to try and be the voice of the chat box. But obviously, if you've got follow-up questions, do drop it in the chat, and we'll try and make it into more of a conversation. So I'm going to kick off with a question from the chat, which is it possible to get into this industry later in life? So, for example, late 30s. And if so, would you recommend an internship first?
Okay, this is from Zakaya, isn't it? So hello to you. Good evening. Yes, it's absolutely possible to get into the industry in your 30s. I'd done lots of sports journalism before, but I really didn't turn my hand to news and current affairs until about 3 or 4 years ago. So I did my master's late when I was pregnant with my second child. I was 30. God, I don't know how old, probably mid 30s, if not a little bit older actually. And I used that master's as my excuse to sort of reset a bit and go back into the industry, not just as sport, but as more of a news and current affairs presenter. I wanted to keep the sport going, but I was always, also really interested in kind of expanding my remit. So yes, it is possible. It depends what you've done before, and it would almost definitely involve, it totally depends, Kai, what your experience is. If you've got no experience at all, you will need to do some sort of study. Um, Internships are great because they're often, and also apprenticeships too, at News UK, which is where Times Radio is, as part of the Sunday Times and the Sun and Talk Sport and Talk Radio, Talk TV. They offer apprenticeships for people who have no experience, and those apprenticeships run alongside courses. So I think they do a course with PA, and there's another one with news associates as well. And these are all journalism courses. So you take an apprenticeship and you learn on the job. The pay's not great and it's very hard work, but you learn on the job. So let's say you do 3 days a week, and then the other 3 days a week is study. So apprenticeships are good like that. Internships don't necessarily work alongside study, but they can be good if you're just getting into the industry. And I think let's not underestimate how, as an older person, you can contribute something a little bit different. It might be a little bit harder for you to get into the industry. I did my master's so that I could go to places like the BBC and say, I'm doing a master's in journalism. Can I come and do some work experience with you? So I used my master's for part of that reason, as a big excuse. I mean, it was a big elaborate excuse, and it was expensive, and it was very hard work, but it worked. So yeah, think about a form of study to go with it, and apprenticeships. I don't know whether the government's extending this apprenticeship scheme or not, but it has been really good for all the people I know who've gone on it, some of whom are a little bit older, and that then pays for their study and gives them a job, albeit it's not very highly paid. But yes, do it. You will contribute something different. You've got more life experience. You've got different perspectives on stories. And I think that's really important. So yes, you can. It might take a bit longer, but yes, you can.
Thank you. The next question is from Nafisa, I think, and it says, what should we do to grow a channel or podcast if it seems to not be gaining much of an audience?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, isn't it? So it's much harder now to build audiences for podcasts because people aren't listening to podcasts like how they did before the pandemic. You've lost your people going on a commute into work. So it can be tougher. Sometimes it can be about changing podcast platforms. I'm a little bit out of date on this, but we're looking at this now as we try and move the offside rule forward for the new season from September. And there are different podcast platforms like Acast. There's Podbean as well. And I think, someone like Acast is good, but they're huge and they probably won't do much to look after you. So I would think about the sort of platform you're on. Most platforms automatically publish to iTunes and Spotify, so most of them do that already. Another great way is to try and it totally depends what the podcast is about, but in the earlier days of the offside rule, we interviewed footballers and we took a lot of we had exclusive interviews. We kind of worked our contacts. This doesn't have to be a famous footballer, but we worked our contacts to have 40-minute sit downs with footballers, and they gave us exclusive lines because they were interviews that we'd organized specifically. And the most newsworthy lines from those interviews, we basically get the interviews transcribed and take out the best quotes, and we then farm those quotes off to different news outlets. So we would send them to different news outlets, and they would sometimes use our quotes, and that's how we would. And they'd have to write, speaking to the offside rule, Joe Hart, former England goalkeeper, said this. So think about ways of sort of, if you've got a special guest, of trying to get that out there, and social media is really good for that as well. Video clips of your podcast on social media work really well. So if you've got Twitter and Insta and TikTok, again, I'm not a huge user of TikTok, and I don't know whether you get podcasts on there regularly, but think about visualizing you recording the podcast or having a visual element to it, and then they work so much better on your social channels and on TikTok. So just think about ways of packaging your pod into smaller nuggets and then putting those out there like that. So that's definitely one thing I'd do.
Thank you. I have another podcast related question, so I think that's what we go to next, and that's Hansneys, and they're asking, what platform would you recommend to start a podcast for a young audience? So, for example, TikTok has a lot of content, so how do you effectively market this content?
I mean, I don't know how much podcast content TikTok has. I mean, obviously you are within time limits as well. As I've said, there are loads of different podcast platforms. So that's one platform that you might be talking about. To a young audience, I would personally really look at TikTok, look at how you're hashtagging things up, look at what's working and what isn't working. So I have a friend who is in her 40s, and she opened a TikTok account and started to have a play around with it. And she started to go to, so during the Euros, she went to England games. She didn't have any press access or anything. She went to England games and she stood outside and she spoke to England fans, and she put it up on TikTok. And she's got it just absolutely, she had this huge following just based on being outside Stamford Bridge for a Chelsea game or being outside Wembley for an England game. And it was really fascinating. So she just went out and started filming stuff, filming the thoughts of England fans, filming the thoughts of Italy fans, whatever, and posting it up on TikTok. And it just absolutely exploded for her because there wasn't many people doing what she was doing on TikTok. And I don't know what your podcast is about, but if there's something a bit different about it, visualize it, use it, and put it up on TikTok. To the point that my friend is now getting jobs because of her TikTok following. So it's really worked for her. And then young audience, there's a big market now emerging for younger people and podcasts. I think people have finally realized that there's a big market there, and I'm talking below 18 now. I don't know how young your young audience is, but check out what other people are doing as well, as because it used to just be Fun Kids, basically the radio station. They used to do the bulk of kids podcasts. Now there's just so many more, but it's a really growing area still. So have a little look at what your competition, let's say, are doing. There's also really good podcast events. So if you look at I'm trying to think the name, the Radio Academy, they host an annual podcast event, and there's a couple of, like the podcast awards, there's a couple of podcast industry events now that might be useful to kind of check out or have a look at who's speaking there, because that might be quite a good way of kind of picking up some extra intel.
Thank you. I think that's really, really useful for the students that we have in the room. There is a practical question that has come up in the chat, and that is Broadcast Journalism Training Council accreditation a necessity to get into the broadcast industry in the UK?
No, it's not a necessity. No, it isn't. What I would say is to have some sort of formal qualification, and not all of them carry that BJTC accreditation, but to have, so when I worked at Sky Sports, my boss at the time said to me, we don't consider anyone unless they've got a degree or a master's in journalism or broadcast journalism, because we want to know, for anyone who walks through the door, we want to know that they've had all the appropriate legal training, that they've got a good idea of what this is about before they walk in the door. I'd say it's less like that now in some places, but in the more traditional broadcasters, it is still like that. And I think at the BBC as well, I think they like you to have that. I think it maybe helps you out a little bit. I don't want to say that not having it completely kills your chances, because I don't think that's the case. You can start, so for example, at Times Radio, we have broadcast assistants, and they will often come from uni courses, but sometimes they've come through some other means, an internship or an apprenticeship, and they won't necessarily have that accreditation, or have done a course that has that accreditation. So it isn't a rule, but I always think that if you can afford to, and there's a way for you to do it, even if you do it alongside working or an apprenticeship where you can get it paid for, I think it's good to have, and it's probably quite good for your saleability, but also maybe your confidence as well, in knowing that you're at the same stage as everyone else. But it isn't essential, and this is more journalism than other types of broadcast media. So I'd say, if you're looking into anything that's journalistic, or perhaps not documentary making, but anything journalistic, I'd certainly definitely consider it.
Thank you. The next question on my list, there's a lot, so we're going through as many as possible.
Fire away, guys, fire away.
But yeah, this is great. My wife has a good experience, about 12 years in broadcast media from India. She has applied directly to many places, but it seems like we are a bit lost. What would you suggest that they do? For example, using recruiters?
Mm-hmm. And I love the fact that you've written Google has no answers for this. And yeah, it is obviously personal to you. So you're based here, but your wife's originally from India, and she's looking to pick up experience here. It's a tough one, isn't it? I think it is a tough one. So I mean, I know on my course, I had similar colleagues on my course who were really experienced in different countries, China, India, places, countries in Africa, and they wanted specifically to work over here, and so that's why they did the masters, because they felt that they needed some form of UK qualification, or they needed some foundation here before they started applying for jobs. I mean, I would also get her to have a think about, is there any way that she can diversify at all, so that she's open to different jobs that might not be as glamorous as what she was doing in India, but that would just get her into a new zone? Because it feels to me that she's got all the experience, but she just needs to get into the space first before she shows what she can do. And there are big companies out there like ITN Productions, who run Channel 4 News, and they run various other productions and all the ITV news stations. And there are loads of opportunities there, and some of them are technical roles. So some of them might be video journalist roles, where you're sitting and making video packages, which is not glamorous, but it means that you're there, and then you've got lots of opportunity open to you. So I don't know what kind of broadcast media she did in India, but she might need to sort of think about maybe coming in maybe at a slightly lower level or a less glamorous job, but just to get in there. Despite having worked at Sky News and Sky Sports for a decade and having my own podcast and all the rest of it and interviewing footballers, when I was doing my master's, I worked at ITM Productions in the basement of a building in central London from 4 a.m. in the morning to 10 a.m. in the morning every day, because I needed that experience. I needed to learn how to make video packages. I needed to earn a living because I was studying, and I needed to have that broadcaster on my CV. I felt like that's what I needed to do. And there were no windows. It was grim. It wasn't paid very well at all. But just from doing that, I was then able to access different opportunities within that company, and all the rest of it followed, and the confidence followed. So although it's not the kind of advice I'd necessarily want to give, I think you probably need to think about coming at it from a different place, if that's useful. And good luck to your wife as well. I'm sure she's very talented. She's just got to find a way in, I think.
Thank you. I actually skipped, I think, one question from Sasim Pat. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. I'm really sorry if I don't. So they are saying, I was my country's assistant director for the advertising and movie industries for 4 years. However, I'm studying MA Media Management. I want to work in part of the media business in the UK. Can you recommend a career for me? So let's say media buyer, media planning, producer. What do you think is a realistic avenue?
Oh my goodness. This is a little bit out of my comfort zone, Sassy Pempet. Advertising and movie industry. So that's where you've come from, and you're now studying an MA in media management, and you want to work in part of the media business. I think it would be really hard for me to recommend a career for you because I haven't got much to go on. I think when you're not sure what you want to do, I think you've maybe got to try a few different things. And there's probably an expectation from you because you've had a career before this. You probably feel like you're probably, spending money and a lot of your time and effort on this course, and you want to come out and have a career immediately. And I can totally understand that because you put a lot into it and you've already had a career. If you don't know exactly what you want to do, I think you've got to be open to trying a few things, and whether that's to coincide with your course or even giving yourself 3 months after your course ends, writing to people and saying, I'm interested in coming to follow you for a week, or can I, use your contacts, use anyone you can to just try and experience a flavor of different things. Because if you don't know what you want to do, I think it's probably down to you to discover it. I can't tell you, and probably other people can't tell you, and I couldn't tell you without knowing more about you, whether you're an organized type of person or a really creative person. I presume that you've asked your course mates or your teachers, lecturers. Please do that if you haven't, and if not, use this as a good excuse to experiment. Whilst you're studying, you don't get this time back again in terms of having free reign to try different things, because when you're in a full-time job and you're earning money, it's really hard to leave that job and try new things, and the opportunities are scarce. So whilst you're studying, and we were always told this, try different things. This is your time to experiment, trying different pathways, using your course as a great excuse to get some work experience. And that's, I think you've got to indulge yourself in lots of different areas probably to work out which one you think is the best fit for you. Good luck.
So next question is coming from Jamie, and they are saying, hi Kate, how do you meet people who might be interested in collaborating or investing in your ideas? For example, I'm doing a film and a TV masters, but no one seems to be interested in mine.
We've, like always, Jamie, it happens to us still all the time. The number one thing for you really is networking, which I know scares the hell out of a lot of people, and we can have a talk about networking if you guys want to, and sort of how to approach it. Networking is going to be a really big one for you, and I think, Jamie, there's nothing wrong with you getting yourself in a post-production house or working for a production company, doing their stuff whilst you get your foot in the door and then start pitching your stuff. If you've got the plan, and it does happen, but if you've got the plan of sort of having a big idea and then selling it or working with a production company as soon as you leave uni or as soon as you're in your early career, that is a really tough expectation to have. As I said, ideas are currency, but you need to start thinking about how you pitch those ideas, and you need to earn a living at the same time. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a really boring job with all your ideas. So try and think about a way that you can get into the industry for a good company. Think about a company that is going to maybe, whether you're 3 months down the line, whether you're 2 weeks into your job or 6 months, is going to say, has anyone got any ideas? And like, honestly, when we meet, so we often meet with, sometimes it's a program controller, sometimes it's a specific commissioner, and we're able to do that kind of based on our 10 years of experience, right? And having had a really good idea and started to make it. And that's the other thing, Jamie, is that if you've got an idea that you can make yourself, make it yourself, if that's possible. If it's a big project and you need big sets and glamorous things, then obviously not. But if you can do it yourself, just start doing it. But otherwise, think about where you can work that will give you income, that will surround you with some really interesting people who will listen to your ideas and who will love your ideas. Ideas are great, and people are always after really original ones. So hang on to them and think about how you get yourself in the right position or in the right workplace for then someone to be able to listen to your ideas. And if it doesn't work, that's okay, because you've still got a job there. If none of them fly. But yeah, it's quite a big expectation to kind of leave uni and sell an idea within the first, or sell an idea within a few weeks of coming out. It doesn't happen very often. And I presume that you're making stuff as part of your masters. So I did that as well during my masters. I made stuff that I thought promoted what I wanted to do well, and then you use those to make your show reel. So start creating some of them now if you can.
Thank you. Networking is a huge one for our students. In whatever industry we talk about, networking is a massive question. How, for example, how do you do it? You mentioned confidence, and that's a massive thing, but how do you practically do it? And also, where do you start with this? Where is the easiest entry point to network? It's a really tricky thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think you will be invited to stuff where you can network, or, I'm a member of Women in Football. You guys might want to think about becoming members of student bodies, or, the Student Journalism Association, if that still exists. I think it does. Or other associations where you will be invited to events. And look, networking's, awful, isn't it, really? And there's no, like, I actually really enjoy it now, but I absolutely understand how terrifying it is, and it is. It's cringe, isn't it? Because you walk into the room and you think, oh, that's awful. I think that the best piece of advice, and the simplest piece of advice that I can give you, is 95% of that room will be feeling the same as you. So you're not the weirdo. You're not the one in the corner who can't get your words out. Like, everyone, and I guarantee everyone is feeling like you. And it just takes one of you to say, hi, my name's so and so. What are you doing here? Or what are you interested in? What did you think of that talk? If you've seen a talk and there's networking afterwards, take a few little mental notes from the talk. And then your best introduction is, hi, I'm Kate. God, I have to say, I really liked the bit in this talk. Or ask them why they're interested in having been there on that evening or that day. So, and honestly, they will want to hug you. Like, even if they don't hug you, they will want to hug you, because you will have, broken them out of their horror of having to do exactly what you're having to do. So yeah, my biggest piece of advice is, even if it feels like everyone knows each other in that room, there are people in that room who don't know other people. And find them, say hello. What did you think of the talk? What are you interested in? Just stuff like that. Stuff that both of you, having watched something, will be able to comment on. And then as soon as you start that, you'll be fine. You can then speak to as many people as you want. You just need to do the first one, first person. And then you'll be on a roll, and the person who you speak to will introduce you to someone else. And then you might start talking to them, and then it just ripples on from that. So yeah, just be brave. Remember, everyone's feeling equally intimidated, and you'll be fine.
Harder said than done, but yes.
It is, but I promise it works. I promise it works.
It takes one try and then the rest comes easier.
Yeah, yeah.
Hansley's got a follow-up question asking you, how do you continue to talk about a topic without losing interest in it? Or, having repeated content?
Well, if you're losing interest in a topic, then you aren't asking the right questions, are you? So I would hope never to. I mean, often I have to cut myself off, or my producer on my radio show is like, can you move on, please? The clock, we need to go to the ads. We've got someone else waiting for you to speak to. So it's down to your questions. If you're losing interest in that person, ask a different question. Ask an unexpected question, and you might get an unexpected response. Yeah, that is probably what I'd challenge back to you.
Thank you. The next one is again a practical one, and I think you mentioned the kind of legal aspect, and it's often harder than it seems. And the question is, can you protect your content from being copyrighted? I think this is especially important if you do like TikToks and kind of self-produced content. And or are people free to pick up the content that you talk about?
So there's a couple of different approaches to this one, I suppose. I mean, first of all, so you'll often have someone who comes up with an amazing idea or says something amazing, and they think they're the first person to say or think that idea. And we all consume the same things. We are subject to the same trends on TikTok. We read the same news just from different outlets. And so the chances are, if you have a great idea, or you say something great, or you post something great on TikTok, that there are other people that are always going to have had that idea as well. And that is life, really. You can't ever wholeheartedly own an idea until you get to the kind of upper echelons of TV production, and you come up with a format, and that format's very specific, and you can then I don't think you necessarily copyright it. Maybe you do. But in kind of everyday life, I don't think you really can protect what you're doing from being copyrighted. And most TikTok trends will start out probably with someone who never intended to start the trend. It's just been jumped on by someone and it's gone big. And I think that you have to accept that other people are going to jump on your ideas. If you started a hashtag or you started something off on TikTok and a celebrity jumps on it, that's going to make it go huge, which is great for you, but it's going to feel like the celebrities come up with that idea because they've got all the followers. So I just think you have to feel your way through it. And if you have genuinely started something, write that in an email and make that your calling card. I was the first person to do this, or I came up with the original concept for this way before XYZ celebrity started doing it. So you can't really copyright your content, not at sort of our level, really. If you were working for a huge production house doing big expensive formatted TV like Big Brother or something like that, the person who came up with Big Brother would have got that copyrighted, if copyrighted's the right word to use. But at our level, no, because it's really hard to prove that it's yours and yours alone, and it isn't worth the fight, kind of thing. You're better off just jumping on it and enjoying it and trying to own it by saying to people, I started that off, or this was my concept and I've got some more ideas for you, and then they'll probably listen to you.
Thank you. We do work with startups a lot within our team and students starting businesses, and it's the same kind of question again and again. And really, the value of shouting about it often trumps that kind of effort to protect
the ownership. Yeah.
The ownership. Yeah. I've got one more question in the chat, and obviously I've got loads of questions, but the last one from the chat at present is, what do you think made your podcast successful and get picked up? That kind of magical ingredient.
I think it was because we were something different. So we were there was no other female fronted football show, and we talked about predominantly men's football. We did a little bit of women's football back in the day. but we talked about predominantly men's football. And also, you know, it was a chance to hear from broadcasters who you see on your screen looking serious presenting the news. It's a chance to hear them behind the scenes, basically chatting amongst themselves, which back in those days you just didn't get. Now we've got loads of kind of spin-off shows and behind the scenes and podcast behind the show, but 10 years ago you didn't get that. I think we were also really lucky that we arrived at podcasting when it was still very cult and people had their favorites, and we developed a really loyal following, many of whom still listen today. Right from the very start, they were listening to us a decade ago, 8-9 years ago, and we've sort of ridden that wave. And then I think we've also, because we're women presenting kind of a what many people might think is a men's product, I think that's also really helped us as well, because people in the industry, brands in the industry started to approach us because they knew they needed to get women involved in their football product. We worked with HTC, the phone company, for Champions League and Europa League coverage, and they wanted to involve women in their project, but they didn't know how to do it. So they came to us and said, well, you're doing something different. Can you help us give a female voice to this very male dominated world? So yeah, I think those were probably the lucky ingredients. And also keep it going. This is in fact, I didn't write this on the tips, and this is a big one. If you're going to start something, for God's sake, keep it going and produce or publish regularly. So if you've got a YouTube regular show or a podcast, whatever it is, try and think about publishing it on the same day around the same time each week, and you develop your following and the algorithms pick you up because you're looking professional, because you're delivering a new podcast on a Thursday afternoon every week, for example. So yeah, it does. And it does mean that you have to stick at things, and it can take a year sometimes to build something up properly, but just keep going. Don't kind of do it for sort of likes and hits. Do it to kind of help you expand, or even to give you a reason to go to a future employer and say, I've been making this show, I've done it every week for the last year. I'm always impressed by that, because it means that someone's got diligence and commitment and perseverance as well.
Thank you. While we wait for any more questions in the chat, I actually got a follow up on that, because you mentioned that kind of uniqueness of a woman's voice in sports journalism. And I wonder, you talked about the opportunities that was in that and the value it created. But were there any challenges in such a male-dominated industry that you faced?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think so when I started at Sky Sports, I'll kind of give you an idea of what it was like. So at Sky Sports News, male, female presenter. The female presenter had to wear a dress the same color as the guy's tie, and you'd never get the lead interview. So you'd never speak first if it was an interview. You'd always be the one not doing the interviews, or you'd be able to chip in a bit, halfway through. And it's changed so much now for the better. It definitely has, and the industry has made huge strides. But yeah, I think yes, it definitely was difficult. And also, at times at Sky Sports, our bosses didn't really like us being very forthright, so they weren't very supportive of the podcast. Generally they were, but there was one person in particular who's now retired, so you can tell he was kind of an old white guy, and he wasn't very supportive and thought it was ridiculous. He didn't like technology, he didn't understand podcasts, whatever, and he just thought it was a ridiculous flight of fancy and thought that it was silly. And told one of my other colleagues that he thought it was silly, which is just nuts now thinking about it. But yeah, you sort of just have to ignore those people, because if you're determined enough, then you'll gain respect by just occupying the field. You'll gain respect by publishing every week or by sticking to it. So yeah, there was a lot of opposition. I've worked in very male-dominated newsrooms. I've met women in the industry who, back in the day, sort of behave like men because that was the only way that they could survive, because they had to match the boys, right? And I think it's better now. Some industries still can be like that. I still see, girls and women sometimes not being as confident maybe as their male counterparts. and having very talented women overlooked for roles because they've not put themselves forward enough. Whereas, and this is very stereotypical, by the way, that this isn't every guy, but the kind of typical picture might be very talented woman, doesn't put herself forward, she's quite quiet, but she's great at what she does. Guy, not that great at what he does, tells everyone he is great at what he does. And does such a great job of telling everyone how good he is that he gets the promotion and the woman doesn't. And I think we're really starting to recognize those behaviors, but that's not to say that you won't walk into newsrooms where there are alpha men, and it may be that you're a guy watching this and you're not that confident, or you're just very diligent, you're just not that sort of person who would strut around the office. And brilliant, because I don't like those people who strut around the office, because the ones who strut around the office often do that because they don't have any other particular talent, and so they have to give it out to cover up for the fact that maybe they don't have as many ideas or as much talent or as much diligence as other people. So I always like to try and spot the really talented people, and but that doesn't, even though they're really talented, they have to learn too to try and put themselves forward and find ways that they're comfortable with of selling themselves and what they do, so that the male peacock voices are kind of drowned out a bit. I'm sorry if that's massively sexist, but hopefully all of you can sort of relate in your own way.
Thank you for sharing. I think, yes, it's one of those really tough questions, and what isn't spoken enough about still, and lots more to change. Jamie's got another question in the chat, which is really about you, and asking, what is your biggest career achievement? What do you actually consider the biggest achievement?
I think setting up the podcast and it's still going a decade later, and being able to work with some really big brands and launching our own production company off the back of it has been one of my biggest career achievements, just having stuck at it for a decade. And also the fact that it became a success without, we didn't start it up to be this big thing at all. We started it up because we were frustrated as female presenters at Sky Sports for never being able to express an opinion, and for never really getting the type of shows at that station at the time where we could get our real personality across. And that's why it started. And it, obviously it turned into something brilliant and amazing. And I'm also really, really proud of what I've done at Times Radio as well. I've pivoted from being a football expert and a sports expert into politics and news and current affairs, and being able to talk about economic charts, situations, different theories, and talking about politics and how Parliament works and everything else. And I've had to work really hard at kind of learning that stuff and absorbing all of that. But that's kind of been the last 5 years really, where I can hold a conversation about things that I wouldn't have had much knowledge of 6 or 7 years ago. So yeah, I'd say it's kind of a mix between those two.
Thank you. Nafisa's got a question, and she's asking that because you took your master's later on into this career, and she's asking whether you think doing a master's or further study is a necessity if you want to kind of change careers.
It definitely gives you a foundation. It gives you a jumping off. It gives you a starting point, doesn't it, or a jumping off point to get into a different career. It totally depends on your contacts and your transferable skills. If you get an opportunity without having a master's or any other type of further study, then absolutely brilliant. Some of your skills may be transferable to different careers, and you don't realize quite how much so. But for me, I think, yes, it was really important for me to kind of take that. I mean, I actually did it part-time whilst I was working my master's. It was really important to kind of take that time and just use it as my excuse to get work experience, to explain to people why I wasn't doing sport anymore and I was doing something else. So I don't think it's a necessity, but for me, it just worked. And again, it gave me the confidence to change career. If you can do it, I started off at drama school. I then worked for a shoe retailer. I then worked in the buying and merchandising department of that footwear retail company. I then went to work for a .com company and worked for the facilities department, so setting up like cafes within the building and health and safety measures. And then went into accountancy. I then went to work for Which magazine as a business researcher. So none of those things I studied for. So it totally depends what you want to do and whether you're maybe prepared to kind of go in at a lower level and work really hard and work your way up. So it isn't a necessity. Depends what you want to do and the level that you want to go in at.
Thank you. So this is a big question. I think perhaps just pointing out a couple of things that you have found while being in the podcast space. What are the trends in the podcast space currently? Just pick a
Okay,
couple that you
yeah.
think are really important.
So I think really important is to bear in mind that people don't necessarily have a 40-minute an hour's commute anymore. There are a lot less people traveling on a train into London, for example. And so people are listening to podcasts at different times, but also people are listening to podcasts when they're walking the dog, and that might be a 30, 40-minute tops walk. Or they might be having it on in the background in the kitchen while they're washing up, whatever. So our podcasting habits have changed in terms of listening. So from what I'm told, shorter is better unless it's like a true crime or unless it has a story thread to it, when it becomes like a TV drama, but it's a podcast drama instead. Shorter is better generally. I think people shudder now when they see podcasts of over an hour. I just think it's, personally, I think it's too long. Like, and unless there's a big reason why, right? There's like 5 different parts, particularly. I think I would struggle to justify anything over an hour, and I'd try and think about, it depends what your product is, but I'd try and think about it being 30 or 40 minutes, or as is happening with some podcasts, much less, 20 minutes. There's something called oh gosh, what's it called? It's a news podcast, and it's called the Minute 7 or something, and it does all the news in like 3 minutes or something, or 7 minutes for the whole news. There's Coffee House Shots from The Spectator, and that is 12 minutes long. So if it's a daily podcast, think about it being micro. So on the way home, I'll often listen to 3 different snaps of things. I quite like that idea. But yeah, I basically would really think carefully about making it too long. The kids area of podcasting is definitely a really big emerging market as more children get into listening to podcasts. And the same for young adult, for the young adult space as well. And I think, now I know that a lot less people are kind of are making podcasts with 3 guys in a room talking about football. I think if you're going to start something new, you need to make it a little bit different. And it's quite interesting because a few people I've spoken to, and again, I don't have my own experience of this necessarily, but a few people I've spoken to, a few bigger publishers, have said, for example, for sport, that they're moving away a little bit from kind of fan-based stuff. Now, I don't know why that is particularly. I think that there is a space for fan-based podcasts and videos and YouTube channels. But a couple of the bigger publishers I know are starting to move away from that slightly. So I don't know what that means. But that's just something else that I've picked up along the way. And yeah, it's just trying to make it a little bit different. And it's I think probably podcasts have got to have quite a small remit. I think the kind of days of a big podcast, you have to leave those to the sort of bigger personalities, where you've just got someone chatting to a myriad of different celebrities about, how to fail, and the Elizabeth Day podcast, all of those podcasts which are kind of interview driven. I think that there are plenty of those around, and you'll often see the same names circling around. So think about something that you've got which is different to offer, even if it feels like a smaller audience. You'll be starting from a small base anyway, so you might as well think about how your podcast is different to other people's, so that you can start building up a smaller cult following, and then see where it goes.
Thank you. Miruz has got a very interesting question. And they're asking if at any time, whether you were working at Sky or when you were doing your podcast, if you wanted to say your own opinion but held back to remain impartial. And I think it's important, like from behind the mic as well as in front of the mic. I think those are probably two separate aspects of this question, because
Mm,
really once you've put something out there that includes your opinion and just being a producer yourself, and maybe you don't want to express your opinion all the time.
mm. Yeah, so I mean, yes, sometimes I have held back my own opinion. Um, I think it's fine to have opinions. Certainly on the radio show, if I have an opinion, I just have to be aware to kind of balance it. At the end of the day, it's me fronting the shows. It has to be about, I have to be true to myself. But at the same time, I have to remember that there are listeners out there who think a bit differently, or and it's really interesting. I've spoken to someone who I'm very, I might be sure beforehand. I know exactly how I feel about this. In fact, I was speaking to someone about the gender recognition certificates in Scotland, and the fact that people can. The intention is for 16 and over to be able to self ID, and also for them to just have to kind of live in the sex different to the one that they were born with, and they wanting to change all the regulations, which seemed to me quite scary. But I spoke to a trans woman about it, and she changed my opinion. She said something really powerful, and I thought that is a really good point. She basically said, it's a lot of fuss over a gender recognition certificate. I'm a trans woman. I've never had to show my certificate before. I go into female changing rooms. They don't ask me for my certificate. Why are we all falling out over this? And I thought, actually, it's fair. That's totally fair enough. So I think a good broadcaster, yes, you have your opinions, but often your opinions will reflect your listeners' opinions. But you need to see the other side as well. You need to be open to the fact that you might be wrong. And I'm really happy to be wrong on the radio. Equally, I'm really happy to have all opinions on, and you as the listener can make your own mind up. It's not my job, and I know that different radio shows work differently. It's not my job to convince you that I think I'm right. It's my job to give you lots of different opinions and different perspectives, and then you feel informed enough to kind of make up your own mind. So yeah, it's okay to have your opinion, but I think you do need to be careful about balancing it, for sure.
Yeah, is that the responsibility to be truthful about your opinion, whatever that might be?
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
You do have to be truthful, but equally you can't force it down someone's throat.
yeah.
So if that's what you think, yes, half of your listeners might be thinking that as well. And if you only want to have that perspective, fine. But then you're not really balancing it out, and you're not necessarily reflecting different points of view. There are some radio shows out there that have a very specific um line to them, or an editorial slant. If you watch GB News, they will, they might tend to go to the right on it, on immigration issues, and that might be led by the presenter, and they're quite happy for that. I think I prefer to listen to lots of different voices and help the listener make up their mind.
Thank you. I think let's go for two final questions. It seems that the chat has run down a little bit.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
But,
Plus, I've been banging on for ages, so that's fine.
it's also Friday, so we can never know where people got to be. So I think perhaps the best question to ask here, to kind of end on a high, is how do you stay motivated? That doesn't have to just be in the industry and working in broadcast media, but as
Hmm.
a person, about your work, about your life, what is the thing that motivates you?
I think I just love it. I'm really lucky. I'm one of those people who is really lucky to be working in the job that they really want to work in. And I've worked really hard to get here. And I don't sit on my laurels. I've been freelance for most of my career, and I'm still effectively freelance now. I don't have a full-time job at Times Radio. We have contracts, but I'm not kind of on kind of a staff member who's got a job for life or anything at all. So that always keeps me on my toes. And I really love it, and I'm always interested in lots of different perspectives and different ideas. I'm working a lot at the moment. I'm working on a children's mental health project, which is really interesting for me. So if at any point, and I did get to the point with sport where I really enjoyed it, I'm starting to get a bit tired of the cyclical nature of sports. I go to a press conference, a football press conference, sounds the same every week, managers giving the same sort of answers. And I just sort of started to want to broaden my horizon a little bit. And that's why, partly why I thought I really want to do more news and current affairs. And I feel like I need to get my skills up a little bit, because I'd never formally trained before I did my masters. I left after my GCSEs, so I left school at 16 and did nothing up until my masters. I then, used that as my excuse to kind of try something a little bit different. So what kind of keeps me motivated is the fact that I'm really lucky. I'm really blessed to do what I do. I work hard, and I think when you work hard, you need to work equally hard to make it show for something. And if you're a hard worker, often you will, because you'll have put the hours in. And so you've got to try and produce something, or you've got to try and, justify all those hours. If you're spending time away from your family, or you're not going out with your friends, you better blooming well make sure that you've got something to show for it. So all of that keeps me motivated. I'm really lucky, and I love what I do, and it's come as a bit of a bit of a surprise. I never set out in my life to kind of be a radio presenter or a journalist at all. I wanted to be an actress or a fashion designer. And so that's it as well. I think that's what's nice about coming into it a little bit later on in my mid to late 20s, is that I'm really appreciative of having tried different things and found something that I really enjoy.
The doing what you love motto.
Yeah, and just try to, and it's also for those of you who are like, I don't know whether I love this or not, just have something in mind to do. Often I'll start off with one aim and I'll end up doing something else. And certainly in my early career, just take every opportunity, try things on for size, and just have an aim of doing something. If you've got an aim or a goal, then that's great. You don't need to spend your whole career doing it, but you need to have somewhere to go and some aim. Work at that, and if it's not right, you'll then come up with a new aim, or maybe it is right and you'll have found what you want to do. But just have a plan. I think that the worst position that you can be in is not having any sort of plan at all.
Completely agree. So I'll lead with my final question then, and then I'll wrap up. Because you mentioned busy workload, and we've got students here and people who are about to set on this career journey, my question would be, how do you manage the busy workload that you just mentioned and make sure that you do have enough time? Because you mentioned you have children. How do you make enough time for the things, the people, the hobbies that are important to you?
I think you sort of have to put in the hobbies first and then fit the work around it. And I do work really hard, and I do work really long hours, but I make sure that the time I've got with my kids, we're kind of doing something, or we're going somewhere, or I'm making use of it. I am one of those people that kind of works a lot. And I think, you've got to be, if you're working so much that you're knackered all the time, then you're not very efficient. So you're not working properly, because you're spending your 10 hours a day working at 70% when you could be at 95% if you'd just got a good night's sleep the night before, or if you'd taken 2 hours off. So my social life and my female friends, male friends are really important to me. So and they also give me ideas and encouragement and enthusiasm, and it gets me out of the house. So, sitting in your room studying 24/7 is not great if you're in the creative industry or you're a journalist looking for stories. I think if you're in broadcast journalism, going out and seeing people is actually really good for your job and your career as well. Or booking in a networking session, have a look at different journalism organizations, and there are student journalism or organizations, and there are others as well where you can rock up to networking events, or you can get a student rate. I think, is it the London Press Club? there's there are a couple of different outlets there where you can go to events and things. So yeah, I think it's just making the most of your free time and almost booking those things in regardless, and making the time to go for a run for half an hour or go for a coffee with a friend, and they will keep you going. And often I'm one of those people that, although it's nice to have a whole day sometimes to kind of work on something, often I'm more efficient. If I know I've got to go for a coffee at 11, I'll slam out 2 hours of work and then I'll go for the coffee. So I'm often more productive if I kind of put little bits in during the day. And yeah, it's just, you know, being in the creative industry or being in broadcast media or journalism, you just can't sit at home and work all the time. You kind of need to be out there, really.
Thank you. That's such a perfect final piece of advice, I think, that our listeners can go away with. And yes, just that's all we have time for. But thank you to Kate for all your insights and advice today. And thank you
Thank you,
for everyone
everyone.
who's come along and has been asking brilliant questions. I would like to ask all of you to do complete the short evaluation survey in the chat box. It really helps us bringing you more events like this, both in person and online. And we will email you the link to the YouTube recording once it's uploaded. And as a final reminder, the final What It Takes of the series will be what it takes to enter the job market. And it will be taking place at Portland Hall on the 28th of March. And we would love to see you, or a lot of you, there. And yes, just thank you again to Kate. It's been fantastic to hear all this wisdom. I think it's just
No,
been absolutely brilliant.
thank you to everyone for your questions as well. It's been lovely to spend a bit of my Friday night. Talking of working hard, I'm on the breakfast show tomorrow, so I have to get up at 3 a.m. So that is my life this evening, research and then a 3 a.m. wake up call. So yeah, the hard work continues.
Thank you. We will